I don't know why, but I couldn't stop shaking. Even with the wool blanket coiled around my body tightly, it smelled sterile and flat like a hospital. I wrung the stuffed animal they gave me in my pale hands. The bear's patrol uniform was already wrinkling with every flex of my digits. The ever-present ticking of the solitary clock made my head pound. Every now and again, I could almost hear muffled voices from behind the two-way mirror. The hanging light above me hummed like a faulty fridge. I wasn't sure why these normally permissible sounds couldn't leave my focus. Without any warning, something knocked softly from the other side of the plain door. It opened slowly, like whoever was on the other side was afraid to make too much noise. I expected a detective with dead eyes to step into the room, but a lithe-shaped stepped into the interrogation room. Her heels clicked on the concrete as she strode over to the table. The scent of detergent and jasmine drifted around her. I scrutinized her for the presence of a badge or a gun, but I couldn't see either. I couldn't really get a good look at her. The harsh light above me silhouetted the strange woman. I expected to hear a pointed question, but instead, she only made a simple request. "Clyde, is it alright if I sit for a bit and ask you a few questions?" At first, I only answered with a shrug. "Fine." She sat down across from me in the metallic chair. The first thing that struck me about her was how familiar she almost looked. She dressed more like a teacher or a librarian. Her already soft face was made kinder by her rounded glasses. She wore an open lavender sweater that looked hand-stitched to me. A lanyard with some kind of ID snaked itself around her neck. The writing was almost illegible, and the printed pictures lacked any color altogether. "I'm Mrs. O'Neill, but you can just call me Nora." She set a plain, steaming mug on the table silently and dug into her purse. She produced a baggie of pastel-colored marshmallow twists and added a few before sliding them across the table. I stared at the mug briefly, watching the bright colors melt away into the dark liquid. I set the bear down on my lap and held the mug in my palms. For some reason, the almost burning heat of the hot drink stopped the shaking, just a little. Are you a cop?" I asked hesitantly. She shook her head and offered a disarming smile. "No. My job is to work with kids like you and make sure they're safe." My chest tightened at the phrasing she used about what would probably come next in my situation. "Is my mom in trouble?" I asked, dreading what she would answer. "No, Clyde. No one's in trouble, but..." She set out a gray and black tape recorder onto the bolted table before continuing. "I do need to remember this chat between us." She pressed the record button on the cassette and leaned back in her seat. The woman crossed her legs and folded her hands in her lap almost politely. I didn't know what to say. I brought the bear closer to my body, squeezing until my knuckles turned white. Mrs. O'Neill asked her first question carefully. "Did someone try to hurt you tonight?" I didn't want to answer. I just wanted to go back, before it all went wrong, before everything unraveled under my feet. I thought back to the last day at school before spring break. Despite it being a shorter day because of Friday's presence, I still felt antsy. I couldn't sit still no matter how hard I tried. When I looked around, I realized swiftly that I wasn't the only one ailed with this restlessness. When the bell for lunch finally rang, we piled into the cafeteria. The lunch ladies carried trays of squared pizza to ravenous hordes. Baked bologna sandwiches were quickly discarded, and food was traded like currency. At one of the less populated sections of the long tables, Ethan sat completely engrossed in his blocky game gear. A couple of the younger kids peeked over his shoulder while he played away as they passed around crude yet colorful Tiger games to each other. I sat across from him and took out the old gray brick of a Game Boy that lay within my jacket. Ethan looked up at me just for a moment. The brightness of the full-colored screen flickered in his eyes as he smiled at me. "Hey, Glade. Doing anything fun over spring break?" I shook my head as I powered on my Game Boy, squinting at the monochrome screen, adjusting it ever so slightly to avoid the annoying glare. "No, Mom's working again. I think she's having the sitter come over." "Oh, the one from the soda fountain? Dude, she's kinda hot." I let out an annoyed huff and kicked his foot hard enough to make him yelp and shoot me a dirty look. I flashed him a satisfied smirk and went back to stacking pills on Dr. Mario. Although it was hard to focus with the constant ding of Sonic collecting coins from Ethan's side of the table. He took a moment to dig into his Batman lunchbox and start assembling his little pizzas from the packed plastic tray. I meticulously unfolded the foil strangled sandwich and raised an eyebrow. "Your mom lets you have those Lunchables?" Ethan looked up quizzically at me as he wiped his sweatpants with sauce-stained fingers. "Your mom doesn't?" I shook my head in between bites. "No, said it wouldn't help me grow." Ethan offered a shrug and only said, "Weird," before plopping the processed disc in his mouth. Part of me wanted to know how he convinced his parents to actually let him have those, but something told me it wouldn't lead anywhere. The bell tolled in a shriek as we scrambled out like a kicked tie to the playground. I followed Ethan out as he held his prized console under his arm like a rolled umbrella. He led me to the dome abomination of climbing bars. Its limbs almost infected the entire sandpit, besides the swing sets. He dared me to race into the top. I smiled and accepted his challenge. Unfortunately for him, only being able to use one hand proved to be his downfall. I huffed and puffed, but sat triumphant. Ethan climbed up shortly after with a glum expression. "See? My mom was right about what those Lunchables would do," I chided with a swift laugh. Ethan's crestfallen expression melted away into his own chuckle. "Maybe, but anyways, I was thinking, you want to come over to my house for the weekend?" he offered, turning to me. "My dad bought me all this cool stuff and, well, I wanted to show it to you." "Showing up as usual then," I said with a snort. He shook his head rapidly. "No, it's just more fun when you're there. Mom and Dad are always so busy." I gave him a sympathetic nod. "As long as it doesn't involve your trampoline again, sure. Just need to phone my mom after we get out." Before I knew it, the bell rang again, signaling the end of lunch and of the school day altogether. The denizens of the playground let out a cheer and dashed back inside for their bags. Ethan and I quickly found our bikes and set out past the lines of idling minivans and pickups that lined the front of the school. We rode past the muddied fields, once thriving with alfalfa, now dotted with covered hay bales. Old Mr. Wentworth waved to us from his John Deere as it chugged along, loading bales into his trailer. The scattered houses and empty fields became our only backdrop until we got close to the main street. We pedaled into the half-occupied strip mall. Hanging above the rest was a single arched crimson K. Peeling shopping carts flowed in and out of the sliding doors like clockwork. We sloppily put up our bikes and walked in, still wearing our school bags. The store was tired and looked like they hadn't been redecorated since the 70s. The fatigued shelves were half-stocked with off-brand sodas, knockoff bag cereals, and cheap box pool floats. Wired bins filled with bargain NES games and made-for-TV VHS movies dotted every walkway. The overtly bright hanging lights only made it plain how scuffed the concrete floor really was. Cobbled together bargain signs hung above in chains. Bland monotonous jingles never stopped from the tinny speakers overhead. We shuffled to the corner cafe in the store. Our eyes drew to the spinning blades of bright red and blue liquid in the icy machine. The colored tiles under our feet creaked as we stood in line behind worn-out parents and young couples. Sad-looking pizza remained under the heat lamps as name-brand signs suffocated the sterile walls. Backlit signs with pinned letters and questionable photos hung above. The sound of a deep fryer bubbling away like it would never end. When it's finally our turn, Ethan set out a wad of wrinkled bills on the counter before I could react, despite my initial protests. The young cashier working alone picked through the mismatched bills with her chipped painted nails, before finally pouring us 2 drinks. We sat down, nursing our sugar-laden paper cups. Ethan smiled smugly at me as he fiddled with his red straw. "I'm paying next time," I said with a grumble. "As if," he responded snidely and stuck out his tongue at me. I rolled my eyes and withdrew my gaze from him and looked out to the rest of the store. My eyes settled on something that struck out from the rest of the crowd. An out-of-place form stood in the store. The first thing that caught my attention was the way he dressed. He was wearing a plain bathrobe that looked like it came out of a Sears catalog. The same kind any dad would wear to grab the newspaper from the driveway. The man looked ordinary, unremarkable almost. His feet were shoeless and muddy, like he had been walking for miles. Normally I would chalk it up to the strange people you see in Kmart sometimes, but this time I couldn't. He didn't move. He only stood in place. The man's expression was blank, like he was deep in thought. He stared at a shelf, but I noticed it was completely empty. His eyes didn't move like they were scanning price tags. They remained motionless. I didn't know if he was there the entire time or if he had just walked in. I couldn't even tell if he was breathing. His chest and shoulders never rose or fell. His skin was paler than the other people, like he had been outside in the cold for too long. The stranger wore a deep 5 o'clock shadow, like he had forgotten to shave that morning, and his hair was unkempt like he had just rolled out of bed. Parents quietly ushered their kids away, shooting nervous glances at the strange man. The aisle became deserted as everyone avoided the walkway, like looking at it would be like staring at the sun. From the cash registers, a man in a button-up shirt with a pager clipped to his belt approached, cautiously from a distance. He smoothed over his comb-over and put on his best customer service smile. "Can I help you find something, sir?" The man in the bathrobe didn't respond. He didn't even look at the manager, like he hadn't heard him. The manager's smile faltered and he rubbed a hand over his chevron stash. He lowered his voice a little and asked something else. Are you okay?" Again, the man didn't respond. The manager chewed at his lip but didn't have a chance to say anything else. Without even a single gesture of acknowledgement, the odd man turned and started to walk out the door. I quickly noted his gait more than anything else. He didn't have the sure stride of a young man. He had the limp of an older man whose body had already started to give up on itself. We all watched him leave. Neither me nor Ethan said anything. My friend just stared at the plastic counter and hoped he would go away. The manager sighed when the man in the bathrobe finally left. He withdrew to one of the service counters and started to dial on the corded phone. I looked down at my hand. The red icy was lying there, completely untouched and already melting. I should call my mom," I half muttered as I dug into my bag. I yanked out the lint-covered calling card and smoothed it out a little with my thumb. I grabbed another laminated card that my mom made me get with her phone number on it. Ethan nodded a little as I scampered off to the payphones. I lifted up the receiver and was immediately greeted by a robotic woman's voice bidding me to type in my calling card number. I punched it in and squinted at my mom's neat cursive-like handwriting, doing my best to decipher it. I punched in her number and laid my back against the wall as it rang. I heard my mom's tired voice over the receiver.
Hello?
"Hi, Mom," I mumbled to her.
Oh, hey, sweetie. You at Ethan's house?
"No, I'm at the Kmart with him. Can I stay over at his house for the weekend?" I asked a little hesitantly.
That's fine, as long as Ethan's parents are okay with it. Do you need a ride back home?
I didn't answer at first. My eyes wouldn't leave those sliding glass doors. I waited for him to limp back in with those blank eyes, but he never did.
Clyde?
My mom asked with a hint of concern flickering. "Sorry, yeah, if that's okay," I said, stumbling over my words a little.
Alright, getting ready for work, but Miss Casey's coming over to watch your sister. I'll let her know to pick you up, okay?
"Thanks, Mom," I said shortly, before we made our goodbyes and I hung up the phone. I walked back over to Ethan and told him who was picking us up. He seemed to perk up a bit at that, seemingly forgetting what he just saw. After what felt like only minutes later, the sitter's beat-up Buick pulled into view. Me and Ethan made our way outside, dragging our bikes alongside us. The sitter stepped out of the station wagon and gave us a two-fingered wave. "Hey, Twerp and Company," she remarked with a smirk as she pulled her aviators up. Her dark eyeliner was already smudged as usual. "Hi, Miss Casey," I said with a smile, more than glad to be taken away from here. Casey leaned casually on her car and thumbed behind her. "Throw those bikes in the back. Don't worry about scuffing anything." Ethan stared at her a bit longer than what was considered polite before following me as we dumped our bikes in the trunk. Ethan climbed into the back seat, but I didn't follow. The high schooler shoved the bikes a bit further back to make sure the door actually closed. It started out of nowhere. One moment I was standing there thinking about what I would play on Ethan's Super. Then I was fighting back tears I didn't even know I was ever holding. My feet moved without thinking and I lurched towards her. My arms wrapped around her. My hands clenched the denim of her lined black jacket. I rested the side of my face against her ministry shirt. I felt Casey tense almost immediately. She took a moment to recover before awkwardly rubbing an arm against my back. She pulled back and gave me a concerned look. "Hey, you okay?" she asked carefully. "Mm-hmm," I mumbled with a shrug. She didn't seem very convinced, but she didn't press me any further. She ruffled my hair once and said, "Come on, let's get you home." She nudged me to the wood-paneled Buick. We settled into the leather back seats. The scent of menthol and artificial pine filled my nose. I glanced over to see a cheap car wash air freshener dangling from her mirror. Casey sat in the driver's seat. She fed a plain CD labeled in blue Sharpie into the aftermarket player. A distorted scream suddenly tore through the speakers and made the seats shake. Pounding drums and a chugging guitar vibrated the paneled walls. We jumped in our seats before Casey reached for the volume dial with a sheepish smile. All ladies passing by with shopping bags in hand cast disapproving glares at the young woman in the front seat. Casey's painted black nails tapped on the steering wheel to the music. The sitter's eyes drew to the rearview mirror. Her gaze settled on me just for a moment before she put the car in drive and sped off. I leaned my face against the cold window, feeling the warmth from my skin be stolen from me. I closed my eyes and felt the car rock me in place as it drove along. I looked out that scraggly field of winter wheat at the corner just before the turnoff to my neighborhood. The short stems of gray and green poking out from the patches of snow rippled in the thawing air. In a short time, Casey pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. We went inside and my mom was fussing with her tote bag. The edge of her badge peeked out from the puffy jacket. My little sister sat on the floor too close to the TV. The bus had already dropped her off. The TV played a PBS all day without end. Mom wouldn't let me watch Ren and Stimpy when Emma was around. On the TV, LeVar Burton carried out a plate of hot dogs and hamburgers to a patio grill in a manicured backyard with his dog following behind him. A woman's voice with a nursery-like cadence read Martha Speaks over scratchy art. The lab wandered around the neighborhood, his tail wagging as he greeted each of the neighbors like his own little morning ritual. A disembodied voice claiming to be Luke the dog voiced his every thought. I sped off to my room and dumped out my school bag and started to repack it with Batman pajamas, Game Boy cartridges, batteries I took from the TV remote, and half-folded Nintendo Power Mags. I dug around for my linking cable before eventually finding it and zipping it up in my bag. I wandered back into the living room with my bag over my shoulder. Ethan awkwardly sat on the couch, not making eye contact with Emma. Casey sat in the nearby armchair, lazily flipping through some illustrated horror magazine with faces that had too many teeth glaring at me. "Your hair looks cool," Ethan remarked randomly. The thin blades of the setting sun made the burgundy streaks in her raven hair glow a sickly red. Thanks," she replied plainly with a raised eyebrow, not looking up from the pages. I rolled my eyes a little and settled my gaze on the CRT for a minute. It had switched to some short news segment, much to my sister's dismay. A well-put-together man in a pressed brown suit spoke calmly from a desk about a welfare check or a missing person report, but I didn't really pay much attention. I eventually dragged Ethan away before he could say anything else stupid. Mom tied her hair in the mirror by the door. She looked over at me. "Have fun at Ethan's. I'll probably be at the console, but page me if you need me." I nodded and gave her a short hug before leaving with all my stuff. The bike ride to Ethan's house wasn't long, only being a few streets away. Ethan's house always looked like a palace to me. My house was only one story and had just enough room for the three of us. His house even had a pool and a separate den with its own TV. He never had to worry about his mom kicking him off the couch to watch the news like I did. We left our bikes in the driveway and Ethan led the way up to his porch. He slid his home key and we heard a soft click of the door unlocking, but the door opened only a crack before stopping dead. My friend sighed and called out for his mom. A chain jingled from the other side as another key was fed into the deadbolt lock. The door slid open and his mom greeted us with a smile at the threshold. "Hi, Clyde. You can set your things down in the den. We'll be going out to the Bear for dinner tonight." "Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Crawford," I said, almost hearing my mom's voice reminding me to formally address Ethan's parents. We hung up our coats and wiped off our shoes before laying claim to the den. The room was crowded with beanbags and oversized couches. A large fireplace of masoned stone bricks occupied an entire wall. Above it hung a plaque with a pair of moose antlers from a bull Ethan's dad shot a couple years ago. Roosting on the mantel was a painted drake of carved basswood. The mallard's green head stared at us with its beady eyes as we entered. Ethan wasted no time to fish the Genesis out of a crowded shelf of cords from the wooden entertainment center and started to set it up. It would have helped, but honestly, I didn't even know how to set one up. When he finished, we sank into the beanbags, feeling its mass bind our bodies. Ethan booted up Golden Axe and tossed me a controller. We cleaved our way through the waves of blade-wielding enemies in the first couple of stages. We bickered about who got the dragon. After 2.5 rounds of rock, paper, scissors, I eventually got the privilege of having the beastly mount to myself. Of course, this only emboldened Ethan to steal all the power-ups he could. In return, I would accidentally breathe fire on him and place the blame purely on my ignorance of the controls. Even though it only felt like we had been playing for half an hour had drifted away from us. Mrs. Crawford poked her head in and told us to get our shoes on and our coats. Ethan's dad gazed at us as we put our shoes back on from his recliner with a neatly folded newspaper on his lap. He smiled wryly at me and remarked, "I know it's probably your least favorite thing, but we're having pizza tonight." I let out a half-amused huff as a dad joke and smiled politely. "Yes, Dr. Crawford." Ethan's dad led us to his pride and joy in the driveway, a dark emerald Impala that Ethan had bragged about to the older middle school girls many a time. I climbed into the leather seats as Ethan's parents traded small talk with me to the best of their ability. I looked across my seat. Ethan was looking out the window and not even paying attention to the noise around him. A part of me wanted to know why he hadn't said anything the entire car ride, but I didn't want to be rude to Ethan's parents. I made a mental note to ask him about it later. I craned my head to gaze out the tinted window. A wide building with many eyes stood out far from the parked car. The tall crimson roof hinted at the restaurant's old identity under Pizza Hut. Backlit vinyl letters across the windows read Hungry Bear Pizza. Double glass doors swallowed us whole as they swung open. The crowded booths spread out like a maze with mosaic glass lamps hanging over every table. Waitresses in polo shirts carried pitchers of root beer and lagers to tables of soccer kids and bored parents. Dusty plastic plants huddled away in forgotten shelves. Ethan's dad took out his wallet and handed us a $20 bill and told us to share it. We thanked him and dashed off to the arcade room. We dodged old ladies with their walkers ambling to the salad bar. A simple paneled door was the only thing that separated us from the game room. The arcade cabinets all blasted out their symphony as tiny hands worked the joysticks and buttons. The change machine spat out a tide of freshly minted quarters that we did our best to eagerly distribute to our loose pockets that now jangled with each step. My gaze was drawn to the quarter-fed candy machines. One row only had gumballs, runts, and Mike and Ike's. The other housed plastic canisters with cheaply made toys stuffed inside. I decided for a moment before feeding the runts machine a coin. The faded top hat of the sun-bleached Wonka logo stared at me. I held out my palms and let the vaguely fruit-shaped candy fill my hands. I idly chewed on mouthfuls as we perused our options. The aggressively fake-flavored banana, cherry, and chalk filled my mouth. I felt a wave of dismay when I saw the newer Area 51 machine crowded with kids in grass-stained cleats. Things with too many limbs exploded into piles of gore and bones, to excitable cheers as other kids observed it like a headsman's blade at work in a town square. Ethan pointed out the unoccupied machine of Sunset Riders. The arcade was adorned with the shapes of gruff cowboys on horseback staring out at the sunset over a valley. We shoved in our quarters as the machine flickered a blue screen with the FBI seal front and center. It had text below I only glanced at. "Winners don't do drugs," it read plainly. I wasn't even sure what they looked like, only that everyone told us never to use them. The characters' intro screens passed quickly as we shot down waves of outlaws, their bodies dramatically flying back like it was a spaghetti western. We only managed to make it past the first two bounties before we were trampled to death by a stampede of steers. I considered starting over again with a fresh set of quarters, but my attention drifted to Ethan. The bright colors of the desert sands lit up his face. "Who do you think it was?" I asked suddenly, leaving context to the wind. "Huh?" He looked over at me confused. "That weird guy at the store." I elaborated. Ethan cast his gaze down, fingers circling the input button absent-mindedly. "I don't know. My dad said old people forget things and act weird sometimes. He didn't look like a grandpa to me. He looked like a teacher." Ethan shook his head and squeezed the joystick like it was a stress ball. "My dad would know. He knows everything. He's a doctor." I remained silent for a moment before asking my final question. "Is that why you're quiet now?" Ethan didn't look at me as he dug into his pocket from our quarters. "I don't know," he remarked flatly, clearly wanting me to drop it. I let out a soft sigh and followed his example. I cast a gaze at the star-patterned carpet, Faint soda stains dotted the floor. We wandered around the rest of the arcade and played what we can find until Ethan's mom waved us back to the tables for pizza. We stuffed our faces as I tried to block the man's dead eyes from my mind with greasy pizza and root beer. I thanked Ethan's parents for taking me out to eat, and they smiled and remarked how I was such a polite young man, and I was clearly a dispatcher's son. We busied ourselves with our wings and pizza. Gentle reminders from the adults about our table manners became background noise. Ethan seemed to want that fancy Neapolitan hot fudge sundae, but Mrs. Crawford assured him she got a big tub of huckleberry ice cream at home. It seemed agreeable enough for him to quit tapping the brightly designed picture on the dessert menu. A stack of neatly folded greenbacks left on the bill was our only farewell. We piled back into the car and sped back to Ethan's house. The Impala ambled into the driveway. The Crawfords lazily slipped out and started to walk back to the porch. I followed them not far behind as Ethan peppered his parents with questions he already knew the answer to. The freezing wind fell silent as shadows lengthened under amber streetlights. Before I shut the front door, I looked out across the street and wish I hadn't. Across the street on an empty driveway was the stocky form of a dog. Its eyes were aglow from the porch light. Its dark brown coat and floppy ears made it plain to me that it was a lab. I expected it to wiggle its body and excitedly dash over to me for attention, but it didn't move. Its eyes never left me. I first thought it was some kind of feral dog or maybe a barn dog, but its coat was too clean, too brushed, its body too well fed from a regular diet of treats and table scraps. Fog from its snout curled around its muzzle as it remained still as a mannequin. It didn't pant or even open its maw. The dog only breathed steadily like it was a ventilator. I tightened my grip on the doorknob and slowly stepped inside and locked the door behind me. It was just a dog after all. It wasn't uncommon to see a dog wander around a neighborhood. Most people didn't have fenced backyards, but its stillness, it was all wrong. I pushed it out of my mind as I wandered into the kitchen, passing Ethan's parents lounging on the floral couch, watching Dayline NBC about someone going missing on a hiking trip. Ethan had already raided the freezer for the prized ice cream. Bowls were arranged on the counter as he piled messy scoops into his own. And dumped a healthy dollop of chocolate syrup onto it. He turned to me and slid over a tub of huckleberry ice cream to me. I filled up my own bowl as Ethan chattered away about something I was half listening to. "Do you know who lives across the street?" I asked suddenly, just as he was about to start talking again. He gave me a puzzled look. "Mr. Mueller, why?" I saw this dog on his driveway." Ethan stared at me with an expression I didn't quite like before turning his attention back to the bowl of ice cream. "He doesn't have a dog," he half mumbled as he dug into his makeshift sundae with his spoon. Before I could say anything else, he walked off towards the den. I don't think I would get anything else from Ethan, as he already seemed bored with my line of questioning. I followed him with my own bowl nestled on my palms. Between losing to Ethan on Mortal Kombat and cycling tape after tape into the VCR, bowls of melted ice cream were emptied as Ethan dug into his collection for things to occupy us. The night only drew further in as the hours burned away in front of the CRT. The muted ticks from the hallway grandfather clock crescendoed at the hour's end. Bells and chimes filled the house as it emitted the toll of 12. Almost on cue, Mrs. Crawford appeared in the doorway, already in her nightgown with her hair down. "Don't stay up too late, okay, kids?" she reminded us with her arms crossed. "Okay, Mom," Ethan said, half distracted while watching The Simpsons. His mom shuffled off in her slippers, leaving us alone. Not long after, Ethan drifted off into sleep on the couch with a blanket wrapped around him. I flickered through the late-night channels in boredom, the glow of the TV being the only light in the den. A commercial played that made me stop surfing the channels. A priest stood by a pulpit, a stained glass window the only source of light. The priest delivered a fiery sermon about hell, describing it as a prison for lost souls to ominous church music. His voice echoed for all to hear as flames and footage of doom played over his sermon. The pixelated behemoths of stone brick masonry spiraled towards the crimson sky as creatures of horns and teeth slithered. Like a flash, it was all over as the TV suddenly switched to a dry announcer reading off a script, wishing everyone a good night. The broadcast suddenly switched over to stock footage of those famous places in DC my teachers have on posters. The semi-transparent American flag waving on the screen as a choir sang the anthem. When the voices went silent, all that remained was colored bars and muffled static writhing in the screen. I took one last look around me, glancing at the lace curtains, expecting to see a shadow cast over the window, but there was nothing. A beam above me creaked like the house was exhaling. I finally shut off the TV, closed my eyes, and let the fatigue embrace me.